Ever feel like trying to stay informed these days?
Yeah,
It's like drinking from a fire hose, right?
absolutely.
So much information, so many different takes. It can be tough to even know where to start, you know?
It really can.
And that's where we come in, right?
Exactly.
We take one complex topic, we dive deep into some source material that you folks send our way.
Right.
And we pull out the key insights, the core arguments, whatever we can find to help make sense of it all.
Think of it as like,
So you don't have to.
yeah, we do the heavy lifting for you.
Exactly.
You get the good stuff, the
Yeah.
insights you need without having to wade through all the noise.
And today's deep dive is focused on something called Project 2025.
Interesting.
Now, we're basing this on an article from TATANKA.
Okay.
And right off the bat, they make it clear this isn't some, fringe conspiracy theory.
Right.
Project 2025 is a real thing, a publicly available plan.
A playbook, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
And it's presented as a way to make government more efficient.
Streamline thing.
Yeah.
And also bring back conservative governance.
Mm.
Kind of a return to certain principles,
Yeah, a framework they're laying out.
But the TATANKA article doesn't just take this at face value.
Yeah.
They dig a bit deeper and offer their own interpretation
Right.
of what's really motivating this whole project.
What's the subtext here?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the deeper story?
And they suggest that it's not just about, typical political back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
There's something a bit more fundamental going on.
A shift.
Yeah, a shift in the landscape.
So what are they attributing this shift to?
Well, the article argues that part of this is a response to what they see as the declining dominance of white males
Interesting.
in positions of power.
Okay.
And they see Project 2025 as an attempt to kind of reassert influence
I see.
in a society that's undergoing a lot of change.
Makes sense in a way.
Yeah, it's like a reaction to those changes.
So how do they say Project 2025 aims to do this reassertion?
Well, they point to a few things like expanding the executive branch, giving more power to the presidency.
Mm-hmm. Centralizing authority.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then there's the idea of replacing certain civil servants folks who aren't seen as aligned with this ideology.
Kind of loyalty test.
Yeah. And that could really change the makeup of the government workforce. Right. And then there's the rolling back of diversity initiatives.
Right. So less emphasis on DEI.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So it's not just tweaking a few policies here and there, right?
No, it seems to be a more fundamental shift in how the government operates.
Exactly. And that leads to the core of their concern, which is the impact on civil rights.
Particularly for BIPOC communities.
Yeah, they don't mince words. They call it a sweeping assault on civil rights.
Wow, that's strong language.
It is.
So what specifically are they pointing to?
Well, they break it down into 5 key areas where they see the most potential for negative impact.
Okay, let's hear them.
First up, voting rights.
Voting rights always a hot button issue, especially these days.
So the article points out that Project 2025 supports what are often called election integrity measures.
Right, we hear a lot about that.
But their take is that while these laws are often framed as protecting against fraud, they can also be a way to justify tactics that disproportionately suppress the vote in BIPOC communities.
It's about who faces the most hurdles, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
strict ID requirements, limited polling places, things like that.
Exactly. And they list out some specific measures. They're worried about things like
Yeah.
strict voter ID laws, making it harder to vote by mail or early voting, purging voter rolls, increasing surveillance of election officials, and even reducing federal oversight of elections.
Which could mean rolling back parts of the Voting Rights Act.
Right. And that's been crucial for protecting minority voting rights historically.
Absolutely, a landmark piece of legislation.
So their concern isn't about whether voter fraud exists or not.
Right.
It's about how these integrity measures could be used to disenfranchise BIPOC voters.
Especially in those key swing states and urban areas with large minority populations.
Exactly. So that's voting rights.
Okay, what's next on their list?
Well, the second big concern is the dismantling of affirmative action.
Yes, affirmative action. Always a lot of debate around that.
Always.
What's their specific concern here?
Well, they say Project 2025 aims to end affirmative action in federal agencies and then encourage its removal in other areas like higher education and government contracting.
So a pretty broad rollback.
Yeah, and they argue that this would disproportionately harm BIPOC, students and professionals.
Who've historically faced systemic disadvantages.
Exactly, and who rely on affirmative action to create a more level playing field.
Right, trying to address those historical inequities.
Exactly.
And what about DEI initiatives?
Yeah, they're concerned about that too.
Okay.
They point out that Project 2025 wants to eliminate DEI offices across the federal government.
Seeing them as unnecessary bureaucracy.
Yeah, and they're also worried about defunding Title IX and other civil rights offices.
So less focus on addressing systemic inequalities.
Right, and that could have a real impact on BIPOC individuals.
Who are working in or seeking to access federal programs.
Exactly, so that's affirmative action and DEI.
Okay, what's the third area they delved into?
This one they call systemic rollbacks in civil rights enforcement.
So this is about the departments and agencies that protect the rights of minority communities.
Exactly, and they're worried about a few specific ones.
Like which ones?
Well, first, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division.
The one that enforces federal civil rights laws.
Right, they're concerned about its power being reduced.
Okay, makes sense.
And then there's the EEOC.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, right?
Right, the one that handles workplace discrimination claims.
Yeah, so if those are weakened...
becomes harder for people to seek legal recourse.
Exactly.
They also highlight concerns about rolling back environmental justice policies.
Which aim to address the disproportionate impact of pollution on minority communities.
Right, and even dismantling protections for tribal sovereignty.
Things like land rights, water access.
Exactly. Those are huge issues.
They are.
So it's not just administrative reshuffling they're talking about.
Right. These changes could really reduce the ability of BIPOC communities to protect themselves.
Against discrimination, injustice, all sorts of things.
Yeah, and that could lead to increased exposure to all kinds of problems.
Discrimination, police violence, economic exploitation, environmental hazards.
Issues that are already major challenges for these communities.
Exactly. So that's a big one.
Okay, so we've got voting rights, affirmative action, DEI, civil rights enforcement. What's number 4?
Number 4 is restructuring the federal workforce and education systems.
Big changes there could have ripple effects.
Huge ripple effects. So first they talk about staffing changes in the government.
What are they saying?
Well, they say Project 2025 wants to move away from merit-based hiring.
Interesting.
And instead focus on appointing people based on loyalty to a specific ideology.
So less about qualifications, more about alignment.
Exactly. And they suggest this could disadvantage BIPOC candidates.
Who might not have the same political connections.
Right. Or who might not fit the desired ideological mold.
It's about who gets a seat at the table, right?
Exactly. And then when it comes to education,
they're
really worried about the potential rewriting of school curricula.
In what way?
Well, they say there's a push to remove or downplay references to things like systemic racism, slavery, indigenous genocide, settler colonialism.
Wow. That would be a major shift in how history is taught.
A huge shift.
Yeah.
And they see it as an attempt to erase or minimize the experiences of BIPOC communities.
And replace them with a different narrative?
Exactly. Maybe a more nationalistic one.
Or even what they call white nationalist perspectives.
Right. And they also point to the possibility of giving states more power to ban books and censor classroom discussions on race, gender, civil rights.
So controlling the narrative, both past and present.
Exactly. It's about what stories get told and whose voices get heard.
Powerful stuff.
It is.
Okay, so that's 4 down. What's the 5th area of concern?
This one is criminal justice and immigration.
Another one with high stakes.
Extremely high stakes. And they describe Project 2025's approach here as authoritarian escalation.
That's a pretty loaded term.
It is, but they back it up with some specific concerns.
Like what?
Well, they talk about the potential for expanded federal surveillance and policing powers.
Especially in urban areas and along the border.
Right. And they're worried about the idea of further militarizing immigration enforcement.
Things like mass deportations.
Exactly, and ending DACA.
Which would have a huge impact on Latinx and immigrant communities.
A huge impact. And they also suggest that there could be a revival of policies that criminalize protest and dissent.
Like what we saw with Black Lives Matter and indigenous land and water protectors.
Exactly. They're worried about a crackdown on activism and dissent.
So basically they're saying that these policies could target and criminalize BIPOC communities.
In essence, yes. It's like criminalizing their existence and their resistance.
That's a heavy accusation.
It is.
So when you look at all 5 of these areas together, what's the overall picture they're painting?
They're basically saying that Project 2025 is a comprehensive plan to systematically dismantle protections and opportunities for BIPOC communities.
While simultaneously increasing surveillance and control.
Exactly. They see it as an existential threat to BIPOC rights.
Wow.
and even a blueprint for institutionalizing white supremacy.
That's a very serious charge.
It is.
So what's their response to all of this?
Well, they end the article with a call to action.
Okay.
They urge people to mobilize, to resist, to actively protect the rights of all Americans. But they especially emphasize supporting BIPOC communities.
Who they believe will be most directly impacted.
Exactly. And they also mention their own initiative, Project 2025, a quiet rebellion of peace.
Interesting. What's that about?
Well, they describe it as a countermeasure to Project 2025.
Okay.
And it's rooted in this idea of love, and it's expressed through things like music cultural exchange, collective action.
So not direct political confrontation.
No more like building community and solidarity. Interesting approach.
Yeah, and then they do something really interesting to drive home their point.
What's that?
They include rewritten lyrics to the Public Enemy song, Fight the Power.
Wow, that's bold.
It is, but it's incredibly powerful too.
So how do they adapt the lyrics?
Well, they update them to address the context of 2025 America and Project 2025.
Okay, so what are some of the key themes?
Well, right away, they establish this sense of unease about the future. They use phrases like cruel summer and fascist drummer.
Setting a very negative tone.
Exactly. And they talk a lot about the erosion of fundamental rights.
Okay.
And the influence of wealthy elites in shaping policy.
That's a common theme these days.
It is. And they also call out specific aims of Project 2025.
Like what?
Things like restricting abortion access, suppressing free speech, influencing judicial appointments, controlling what's taught in schools.
They're not holding back.
Not at all. And they also touch on this theme of Christian nationalism.
Interesting.
And they worry about efforts to keep people scared, uninformed, and beaten. So a sense of manipulation and control.
Exactly. But it's not all doom and gloom. There's also a strong call to action.
Okay.
They use words like rise, speak, march.
Mobilizing the people.
Exactly. And they have this powerful line, our freedom of choice is now freedom to bleed.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. It really underscores the high stakes they see.
No room for neutrality.
Right. They say, we fight the power or we let the dream die.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And they also keep some of those pointed cultural references from the original song.
Like what?
They call Elvis and John Wayne symbols of a lie and whitewashed heroes.
Challenging those traditional icons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in contrast, they name civil rights leaders like Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson.
Lifting up those who fought for equality.
Right. And they say that Project 2025 threatens their legacies and the progress they represent.
I see.
And there's also a lot of distrust towards the legal system in the lyrics.
How so?
Well, they talk about the wealthy controlling the courts, and they say democracy dies in litigation.
Referencing the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Right. And the potential threats to LGBTQ+ rights.
So they see a direct link between Project 2025 and the rollback of civil rights.
Exactly. And they're very direct in their condemnation of Donald Trump.
What do they say?
They call him a straight-up fascist, built on white supremacy.
Wow, no mincing word there.
Nope. And they also criticize motherfuck heritage and Elon Musk's sick fantasy.
Strong words.
Very strong words.
So the overall tone is one of being woke and aware.
Yes, and the need to resist and prepare.
Like a call to arms.
Exactly. And they use this striking analogy. They say, Project 2025 is like Jim Crow in a suit.
Suggesting a more subtle but equally harmful form of oppression.
Exactly. And they keep hitting on this idea of freedom being a co-opted slogan.
For the billionaire elite.
Right. And they specifically mention concerns about banning books and busting unions.
So a lot of hot-button issues packed into these lyrics.
Oh, yeah. And they even name figures like DeSantis and Watts, associating them with these restrictive, almost dystopian ideologies.
Like Gilead from The Handmaid's Tale.
Exactly.
So it's not just abstract ideas, they're connecting it to real-world figures and policies.
Exactly. And throughout it all, they keep repeating this call to fight back every day.
And for power to the people.
Exactly. But then the bridge of the song shifts a bit.
How so?
It becomes more aspirational. They talk about defying the system, believing that love conquers all, working to replace the system, and establishing equality for all.
So a glimmer of hope amidst the anger.
Exactly. And it really echoes that underlying philosophy of TATANKA's quiet rebellion of peace.
Yeah, it's about building something new and better.
Exactly. So these rewritten lyrics, they're not just a gimmick. It's a really powerful way for them to communicate their concerns about Project 2025.
And to inspire action.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first of all, Project 2025 is a real thing.
A public plan for conservative governance.
But the TATANKA article interprets it as potentially driven by anxieties about changing demographics.
And a desire to reassert traditional power structures.
Exactly. And they raise serious concerns about the potential rollback of BIPOC rights in multiple areas.
Voting affirmative action, DEI, enforcement of civil rights laws, education, criminal justice, immigration.
And they ultimately see it as a threat to civil rights and a step towards institutionalizing white supremacy.
Which is why they call for mobilization and resistance.
And they offer their own approach with the quiet rebellion of peace and that powerful reimagining of fight the power.
So whether you agree with their interpretations or not, it's important to understand these perspectives.
Because they represent a significant viewpoint in the ongoing discussion about Project 2025.
And what it could mean for the future of America.
Exactly. And that leads to our final thought for you to consider. Given the potential for these big shifts in how our government operates, what do you believe are the most effective ways to respond to concerns about civil rights and the direction of the country?
Right. Is it through direct political engagement, cultural expression, and solidarity, or maybe a combination of approaches?
It's a question worth thinking about.
Definitely.
And if you're interested in exploring this further, we encourage you to check out the TATANKA website.
And to seek out information about Project 2025 from a variety of sources.
So you can form your own informed opinions.
Exactly, because that's what matters most.
Absolutely.